Yeah, thanks, Hale. I really appreciate that. And I'm excited to have Nicole and Mikey here with us, who are coming in with a little more fresh eyes to this. Because I know talking to them before the show, we're just going to have some interesting conversations, I'm sure. And so let's begin. What is the pathway, though? Well, the pathway, as Hale has said, is is a very artistic kind of personal reflective text that centers around a pathway which runs through all these different kind of venues. A forest runs past a crucifix, runs past a church, a stream, all those kind of things. And and what Hale and I focused on primarily in our last episode, what I'll bring back, is Heidegger talks about the pathway being constantly there. So that there's a pathway that is constantly present. It's just constantly there. And so the first philosophical question is what what is the pathway? And I think a simple kind of overarching kind of theme is it's just an image for consistency. Is that it's something that is constantly present. Now we can discuss the meaning of that a little more, whether that's just the consistency of life or the consistency of our how we relate to space and time. But I think it's ultimately to represent a constant. And COVID-19, although I would argue in a sense, it's almost become a constant. Um, when it first began, definitely was not. Definitely was not on our day-to-day path of which Heidegger describes the the walker or the person on the pathway being helped along by the pathway as they journey through whatever they're journeying through. In a sense, our pathway, our journey, if you will, to use another poetic term, our world, to use a Heideggerian term, was destroyed a little bit, or at least changed by COVID-19. And I'm just getting the preliminaries out of the way so that we can just launch right into it. Heidegger presents the idea of the epochal world, a world in which a world which has passed away, but we can still observe, we can still recall. This is quite similar to our childhood. We can't go back to our childhood. We have things that will remind us of our childhood, but we can't actually go back and interact with our younger selves. We can't go back and interact with those we have lost to death. Like we can't go back, but we can observe them. We can remember them. We can be present that way, but we can't be there. And I think COVID for the last year and a bit, um, we have had to face that the world of normal social contact has been taken away. The world we knew is not the world that is now. And so I want to open the floor. In fact, I want to just invite someone to start. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, what is one thing? Like, do you have any questions about my analysis? First of all, but second, what is one thing? And this is a question for our audience as well. You can put in the YouTube if you're listening, or the comments on Mixcloud after the broadcast. Is what is what is one thing that you don't see going back to normal once COVID is over? I open the floor to discussion.
Am I allowed to talk as the tech person here?
Yeah, Mikey, go ahead, please.
Okay, here's my view. The path is an illusion. Imagine you're like above a forest and you're looking down and you see chaos everywhere. Trees and animals and streams and dirt and all the chaos and disorder in a huge forest. And then people build a path, an artificial thing, which which winds its way or maybe goes straight through the forest, and it excludes the elements of the forest. So maybe there's a fence on each side of the path so the animals can't get in, and because it's paved, plants can't grow there. So it's an artificial break in the chaos, and then people walking down the path live in this illusionary world where they think the world is the path, where actually the path is an anomaly. So in my view, COVID reminded people of what the world is really like. So the protection of the path was, at least temporarily, um, diminished by COVID. But COVID is real. It's viruses are part of the world, and viruses that endanger people are part of the world. They're part of the forest. They're part of the chaos. And so I would say that what COVID did is it threatened or perhaps partially destroyed, it diminished our illusion and reminded us of the actual world. That's my view.
Great, thanks, Mikey. I will let someone else go next. I do have a response to that, but I'll let someone else go next. How about you, Hale? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of like what Mikey said. I mean, it's again, when dealing with any text like this, it's kind of a challenge to pin down exactly what's going on. But I will say that, like you and I talked about last time, Tagen, and I think this relates a little bit to what Mikey's getting at. I sort of put forward the idea that we've left the path, that the path represented a meaningful contextual whole that people pervaded through in their particular cultural and time period, um, and that was a certain kind of environment, and that for various reasons, many of which have been more so highlighted, I would say, by COVID, we've kind of left that sort of, I don't want to say tranquil because that's very reductive and it's very, and also very naive, but um, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. I agree with Mikey in that the path has that COVID has greatly disturbed our world, our sense of self, our sense with each other, um, and how we relate to each other and our own mortality, both on a personal sense and in terms of our wider community. Uh, but I also think that our response to that has been to engineer more, to find ways to put more distance between each other, to rely more and more on technologies. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily that's wrong. I just think that that's a natural response, given the way in which the world was already going. That was always going to be the way that we were going to respond, and it's just sort of a fact of what's happened. That things have become, in a response to the chaos that Mikey has mentioned, as we've left that sort of tranquil agricultural path world that Heidegger kind of alludes to. We've turned more and more to respond to that. We've turned more and more to a digital medium of human being. Would be my response. Yeah.
Right. I appreciate that, Hale. Um, again, I think I think if I could, I'll take a moment to respond to both Mikey and you and say, although a little bit different, both your points have some similarities, in the sense that COVID has forced us to awaken to some harsh, stark realities. Not that we weren't aware of them, but I think it has helped us, especially for those that have, had to lose someone in the midst of the lockdowns and stuff like that. It's forced us to realize the necessity and the preciousness of time and the interactions we have with each other. In terms of the pathway being an illusion, I think I think you're right, but I do think there's a base pathway which we all follow. We all want to be in relationship. We all want to be a part of something. So yeah, I don't think there's a set structure, and I think in some weird messed up way, like, I'm not saying COVID's a good thing, but like what I think the lockdown has done is, and this brings us to a point in the pathway where I think Hale and you talked about this point in our previous episode, but talked about how Heidegger references the bench and how important that bench is that he references, because the bench allows the traveler on the path to sit and wrestle with, the great writings of the great thinkers. But we can take that and we can say that the lockdowns, not COVID, the lockdowns were in effect the bench. We were forced to sit this one up and to really reflect on what was important to us, what was central to our world. And I think that's a unique experience, which we don't have often because we live in a fast-paced society. And as for the reliance on technology, I mean, I'm grateful because I get to participate in the show like this week after week virtually. But it still is not, as we've talked about before, is not how philosophy is to be experienced. So, Mikey, I know I didn't touch on all your points, but I want to get your views on what I just said. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Like, what's your stance?
Well, I'll nuance a little bit from what I said before based on your response. So I think COVID has challenged human arrogance in at least two ways. The first way is, if we think about our medieval philosophy education and the great chain of being, where in the Catholic view of the world, angels were at the top, below angels is God, below God is humans, and then on down the line to mammals, and then other animals, and then plants, and then rocks and non-living things at the bottom in a hierarchical way. So I think humans have been brought to their knees in the last year and a half by a tiny little virus. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the human world has been brought to its knees in desperation, trying to figure out how to save itself from a little virus which is supposedly way down lower on the great chain of being. So I think that COVID has challenged that great chain of being model. And secondly, I think COVID has challenged the arrogant view that many of us have that modern technology and modern medicine and modern conveniences and modern cities protect us, sort of like the path. Like now we're free to safely walk our paths. Maybe the path that Plato described as the embroidery of many colors, right? We're free to express ourselves, pursue our dreams, and pursue happiness, because now we're protected from the natural world. And I think COVID has reminded us that all of our technology and medical science and modern conveniences can be brought down with natural phenomena that we are utterly incapable, at least for a period of time, of dealing with. Maybe now we'll get a grip on it. Maybe we won't, but it's shaken us for sure.
I don't I'm gonna respond to that real quick. I don't think it's safe to say the world was brought to its knees. I feel like it's safer to say that the world has gone through a transition. The the even with the sense of long held social conventions being altered, that is not, if anything, if you want to be even further dramatic to the idea of the epochal world, it's safer to say the world in which we knew in terms of social conventions have passed away. And so we are learning to come to grips with the fact that for each one of us there is an end to our pathway, and there was an end to the way that we interacted, and yeah, I'm just hesitant to say it brought the world to its knees. Hale, what are your thoughts?
I really like both of what you guys are saying, and Mikey, I really like what you had to say in reference to technology and this idea that, which is something I was thinking about the other day, that somehow our technology will save us. And relating to what you were talking about earlier, Tagen, you mentioned, okay, so as our worlds change, particularly our own personal world, um, the space that we pervade, the things we understand now, we understand ourselves, as that's become more insulated because of the lockdown and all that kind of stuff, right? Which seems to be slowly opening up now. Many of us have had to. Well, the hope is that people would turn more inwards in a perhaps philosophical or even spiritual mindset to figure out who they are and what's important to them as an individual. But really, I think what's happened a lot of, particularly within the prevalence of the social media and all that kind of stuff, is technology as distraction, and we confuse distraction with solution,
Mm,
right? The
right.
technology will not stave off our mortality. COVID is a reflection of that mortality, um, very much throwing that fact for all of us in our face. And what a lot of time now, I don't want to be sound ridiculous and say that technology does not, technological progress doesn't help prolong one's life expectancy in all sorts of ways and keep one safer, and that's a ridiculous claim to try and make. But I think the way in which most people actually use, engage with, and understand and really hold technology close to themselves is, particularly within this time as COVID, and particularly a time spending a lot of time at their house, is more so through a distraction, right? Keeping
Right.
themselves like, what am I supposed to do with my time? How am I supposed to interact with my friends? How am I blah 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 blah? All this kind of stuff. It will be through and with technology of one
Right.
form or another, and that it's not a protection. It's just keeping us focused on something else, right? Rather than having
Right.
to deal with like what Mikey is talking about, the fact that nature is being very clear with us that we're not in charge in the way that we think that we often are. Right?
Yeah. No, for sure. Good points. I want to briefly just go on a bit of a, actually, um Nicole, did you have anything you wanted to add from earlier? Because we didn't end up getting around to you, I don't think. My apologies.
Yeah, so I agreed very much so with Michael's points about how the path is an
Oh,
illusion.
we
Um,
we can't hear you, Nicole. Shoot. That'll see. This is the downside of technology: is when it doesn't accomplish the purposes we have in mind. But that's okay. Nicole, when you're back, just
Actually, I can
let.
hear Nicole's actually fine on my end here.
Oh well.
Yeah, Nicole, I could hear you as well.
Oh, what? Okay, well, just a second.
If I talk now, can you hear me?
Okay, well,
Yeah, I hear you.
Hey, Tagen,
weird,
can you hear me?
cause I can't hear
Oh
you, Nicole.
no.
Tagen, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry, folks, this is the life. Yeah, I can hear you, Mikey. Weird.
Tagen, check
Can't
your.
hear you.
I'll have to edit this part out. Tagen, check your audio output on Zencaster settings. I know you check your input. Check your audio output.
I can't. The recording has started. I can't do that. I could hear Nicole before.
Nicole, did you disappeared and then came back? Did you change any setting?
I ended up like being like disconnected because of my internet.
What?
But I could hear everybody during the same time, but it was booted off the Discord call.
What?
And it was like, oh, Zencaster loading, Zencaster loading, Zencaster loading.
Okay.
I was like, I can hear everybody, but
well,
I restarted everything because it was like all weird and laggy.
I still can't hear anything.
Well, she's coming through for me, and she's giving me squiggles on Zencaster.
I could see the squiggles.
Hey Mikey, can you ask your wife if she can hear Nicole on the stream?
She's not watching the stream.
Oh.
But Nicole, talk. I'll look on the mixer.
Hello.
Yeah, she's coming through on she's coming through on the stream. It's only you taking that. Hale, can you hear Nicole? Hale?
Hi.
Yeah, I can hear
Hale.
Nicole. Yep.
How are you doing, Hale?
I'm good. I can hear you.
Good.
How weird.
Yeah, okay, weird because I can hear Nikki on the stream. I can't hear Nikki.
I swear I'm not playing a prank on Tagen right now. I wish it was just a prank, but it's not.
And Tagen, you can hear me. Nicole, can you check your
It should be using my headset because it always defaults to my headset.
Oh dear.
Check your settings on Zencaster. Your input. Just double check.
I can't do that. Wait, actually, maybe I can.
Oh, you should be able to.
It doesn't let me click anything.
Because the recording
it's not clickable. The only thing that's clickable is the mute button. The settings button is not clickable. You know, at the worst case scenario, I can just like go off the show. Like although I
no, everything's fine. You're going through on the Zencaster and everything. Default, like it says you're using default deep space fine Bluetooth. Is that right? Is that right?
That's the right one.
Tagen, what do you Tagen? I can't explain it.
Do you want me to rejoin the Discord or something?
Something is off. So, Tagen, are you like using your audio through the Discord or something?
Okay, well, I guess you
I
should do
through. You can't hear me, especially.
Tagen, are you deafened on? Tagen, are you deafened on Discord?
Yes.
Tagen, log off of the Zencaster, then log back on Zencaster. Let's see if that fixes it.
But are you still gonna get the file we already have?
Yeah, I'm not gonna. I don't know. Let's see. Wait. How can I do that?
You could pause.
Maybe I'll just stop the whole show and start a new. I'll pause the whole. Wait. Maybe I'll just stop it and then start another recording. Let me just stop the Zencaster. Hold on. I'm going to stop it. Okay, I'm going to hang up. Okay, I got all the tracks.
Okay.
Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just make sure I have all the tracks. Let me just get all the tracks, then I'll just do. Then I'll hang it up, and then I'll start a new call. I don't know if it's a new link or not. Then we can maybe that'll fix it. So let me just get mine. That's weird. And I'll just edit this part out. I'm gonna get everyone's track. That was about a half an hour. We could like we'll do another half hour. Okay. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sorry for the issues.
Yeah, I don't know what. I can't explain this. Okay. I'm going to hang up the call, and if there's a new link, I'll put it in the window. Okay, let's see. Okay.
Hello?
Okay, Tagen, I hear you. Nicole,
I'm back.
talk.
Nicole, I can hear you.
Yay,
What?
that fixed it. Okay.
Zencast the glitch, right?
Yeah,
That's
sounds like a glitch. Yeah, but it had something to do with you rebooting or something. Whatever you did. Okay, Hale, are you
But
there?
then why would
Yeah, I'm
why
here.
would only Tagen not be
I
looking
have
at
no
me?
idea.
So
I have no idea. It's beyond my capacity to understand. Okay, can everybody hear everybody now?
Mikey, you can see my squiggles, yeah?
Talk again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All
Okay,
right.
I'm gonna start recording again and then do another. I would say do 35 minutes, Tagen. Okay, I'm gonna start right now.
Okay.
So Tagen, you can prompt me on this
Yeah.
with the same question that you did last time, and then we can go from there. I don't remember what you asked me.
So Nicole, because we got into that heated discussion, I don't think we ever got around to you in the first bit. So is there anything you'd like to add, or comments, or questions you have about the reading?
Well, I would like to say that I very much so agreed with Michael's point on how the path is largely an illusion. I think Michael even made a strong claim that the path is an illusion and it's not something that's set in objective reality, you know, and quote unquote objective reality, however you want to define it. And I would say that I I'm quite understanding, and I do like the philosophical idea that things in our world are quite subjective based on what our like cultural and social and all these all values and how they all intertwined. And I think they make a social reality that we then believe to be our actual objective reality. And based on that kind of viewpoint, it would make sense that the pathway is an illusion in a sense. So basically, if think about it this way, a very, I guess, well praised goal in life is when you're growing up as a kid, your parents typically want you to be some sort of high ranking professional, you know, a doctor, a lawyer, engineer, dentist, whatever, right? Those are kind of the four main ones that parents want their kids to be. And to get to that point is kind of like almost a linear path, or at least that's the ideal way, or you know, the proposed way to get to that point. You go through elementary school, you get good grades, you go to high school, you take all the sciences, you take all the maths, you get good grades, go to university, you do that, you go to grad school, you do that, and then you graduate, and then you're in your career, right? That's kind of the pathway. And then once you're there, you're a high ranking person in society. That's one of the pathways that society tells us that we should be going towards, or at least, you know, parents kind of go based on society, whatever way you want to explain it. But it's undeniable that is something that is, I guess, pushed a bit in our like Western society here, and maybe other societies as well. So in a way, that path is kind of an illusion based on what our society values and what our society thinks is something that is important. And then you can also, I guess I want to give this example because it's one that people can probably relate to a bit. and our viewers can relate to. I guess in a more philosophical view, or even in a more academic view, if you are a philosopher or aspiring philosopher, and you have this path in mind where you want to figure, and this is almost like what Heidegger kind of wanted, from my understanding, is you want to understand the true essence of being and all these things, and how everything works in terms of what it means to be a person in the world and all these things. And he really wanted to come with that answer, right? And maybe he didn't want that the whole time in his career, but that's might have been a huge goal in the back of his head, as with other philosophers, they kind of would want to come up with something that is groundbreaking in terms of their ideas. And when you go through life and you have that goal in your mind, and you say, I want to get this goal, I want to get to this goal, I'm going to do whatever I can to get to this goal, you kind of lose sight of all the other things in the world that are important. And that's what Heidegger talks about as when he frames the simple, right? There are all these things around you that you are forgetting about, like the oak trees and whatever else, right? It's life. The good things in life is not just about following the path, right? And I can relate to this in terms of COVID, because I was very much so following my own path, and I was very tunnel visioned in the sense that I knew what my goals were. I want to get to those goals, and I want to do well in school and all these things. And then COVID really did make me reevaluate a lot of things, and I'm sure that is the case with many other people. But
Absolutely.
reading this work by Heidegger really did relate to me in that sense too. So I'm really happy that it was picked. So thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. And before I allow anyone to respond, I want to take a moment to thank our radio stations. So first up goes to CJSF, which is the SFU radio station. Thank you so much for allowing us to be broadcast on your airwaves. And then for CHLY out of Vancouver Island University, thank you for also allowing us to be broadcast on your airwaves. And as always, you can find us on our Mixcloud and our YouTube, both at the Canadian Philosophy Show. And feel free to get in touch with us on our social media account, Facebook page, also the Canadian Philosophy Show. All right, thank you to our radio stations, and be sure to follow us on our socials. Back to the conversation. Yeah, Nicole, I think that's an excellent, I think that's a really good observation. I'm full disclosure, I'm a guy who loves systems. Okay, I live for systems. I live for objective truth. Okay, and so when I hear someone say I love subjectivity, I'm like, no. But that's just my own silly opinion. But yeah, I think it's really good, and I think Hale, that's what we kind of talked about as well, and in terms of feeling kind of the drag of COVID, not actually being able to sit at that bench and think with those thinkers and work through those, wrestle those, and then apply those to our own lives. And Mikey, you seemed like you had something you wanted to say. So before I move on to the next point, I want to give you that time.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on what Nicole said, because I think she's really astute and on the right track, and at least in my view of Heidegger. So I just realized something, which is when I read the piece, I know Heidegger specifically mentions 2 world wars, and he specifically mentions media, modern media or mass media. I don't know if he used the word mass, and he contrasts those things with the simplicity. He uses the word simplicity quite a few times. The simplicity of the path, and I think oak tree or some kind of tree, oak trees, right? Now, I don't, in my interpretation, believe that he was condemning the modern world. I don't think he was arguing that we should all lead very simple lives. But I think what he was doing, without specifically forecasting a pandemic like COVID, he didn't know anything about that. I think he was warning us that our simple paths are subject to being shattered or being threatened or being blown apart. That what I'm saying, I don't know he said it, but what I'm interpreting as our illusion of safety, our illusion of simplicity, our illusions of security are under threat from world wars, from bombardment by media, and now from COVID. So I think Heidegger was very astutely, in my interpretation, warning us that life may not be as simple and as safe and as secure as we might think it is when we're walking down that quiet path.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think um, if I can make an observation, bringing it back to what we talked about, Hale and I, in our last installment, and just speaking from my own heart, the disabled Heideggerian, as I'll go by for the rest of the episode, is I think Heidegger's point, even in the pathway, was to say that we are often too caught up in our own ambitions and our own desires, and sometimes we fall back into what Heidegger refers to as the they, just our place in society, going along, kind of not really fully aware of the ramifications of our mortality and so on and so forth. And so I think even when we have those goals, right, of being a philosophy professor or a teacher or whatever it is, right? We focus on those, and we contend, our Dasein can tend to get absorbed into those. And the term he uses is ensnarement. And so our being kind of got wrapped up in this world and our ambitions, only to have COVID hit, and that's to kind of be, have some cold water splashed on our Daseins, and we're like, oh hey, it's time to wake up again, because we got to start living life, not just existing in life. And yeah, I think that's good. Hale, I know you've done some Heidegger stuff yourself. So what are your thoughts on all this stuff?
I think I really like what Mikey brought up there, and I think when I think about it, and also too Nicole, um, when I think about it, one thing I would say is that Heidegger would say that we're always, as stated, we're always beings in the world, and we're always beings in the world in a particular way. When we're in tune with the pathway, I mean, like, as a side note, Heidegger came from a very provincial, small town German background. And while he certainly wasn't, I don't think he certainly wasn't a Luddite, he definitely uh, put that sort of small, very personal, rural world on a pedestal. And he was very suspicious of the mass media, the world of mass media, the big city, all that kind of stuff. And I think what he would say is what I get from the pathway and what I get from our current experiences right now is that each of us in our sort of authentic trajectory of trying to figure out who we are and how we want to be, and like those classic kind of angsty young philosophical questions: who am I, right? Who am I? Who am I going to be? What's important to me? What's and my perspective too, which comes into that, of figuring out like just what's going on. um, that stuff, like Mikey kind of pointed out, gets completely thrown into turmoil. It gets entangled, it gets destroyed, it gets reduced by these much wider world events and the interpretations of those events by, like you were mentioning, the mass man or man. We could think about we think about situations where people talk about mass hysteria for legitimate or illegitimate reasons, right? And we all kind of get swept up and kind of leveled out in that whole process, and in part of that becomes us losing touch with our own personal projects. This is obviously, these are like general claims, as like certain people would find that things have been very different from them, but I think Heidegger would say that that's events like world wars, events like pandemics, events like you know, mass hysteria of one type or another. They rip people out of their relationships with themselves and the world that's closest with them, I would say.
Right. Yeah. You know, like there's where I want to take us next is kind of back to one of the first, back to our very first Heidegger show we ever did. You know, bringing it way back to where I started to where I talked about the three principles of phenomenology, because I think I want to spend the last bit of our time looking at COVID, looking at our experience as much as we can through a phenomenological lens. So, and it's going to be hard because, but we're not here for the easy stuff. We're not here just to have a good time. We're here to put what we learn and what we strive to be into practice. And this is going to be interesting because, full disclosure, I didn't warn anybody I was going to do this. Actually, I didn't even know. So it's fully spontaneous. But here we go. So, the three rules of phenomenology are to the things themselves. So when we are examining a phenomena, or analyzing a text, like on the bench, or even an experience, we must, as much as possible, try to go back to that thing itself. Which means, I'll use the example of a text. You look at Plato, you look at Aristotle, for what they are saying and what you understand, without trying to get some external, feedback from your professor or your friend who's like really big into this or whatever. You try to encounter the text for what it is, while also recognizing step 2 of phenomenology, or the second principle of phenomenology, which is that all acts are interpretive. So realizing that everything is going to be interpreted slightly different based on your experience, based on your upbringing, based on your religion, stuff like that. Things that make you who you are. And then finally, the recognition that the world in which we dwell, so the world in which I dwell, is different from Nikki's, is different from Hale's, is different from Mikey's or Michael's. Although it dissects right now, because we all have similar interests, philosophy, graduate school, whatever that is. So we encounter each other. And so I want to all start, because it's kind of a tall order, to examine our COVID experiences and to see how that has shaped our Dasein thus far, how that has changed us, or how it's fortified us in some of the things. So for me, one of the biggest things has just been the recognition of how much, because I'm an extrovert, and also just because I'm a social guy, I would like to think I need people more than just needing them, but I get my energy from being with people. I love, going out to coffee with people, having conversations, being at the university, encountering these texts. Right? I couldn't do that this past year. And I told Hale on the previous show, it was harder for me to do philosophy and to do it well, because I wasn't in the atmosphere. I wasn't, if you were, breathing in the air of the philosophers. I wasn't encountering it in that much of an impactful way. Where then I was prompted to, do the readings, encounter it, and then apply it to my day to day life. It was just more of a distant experience. And so what I was forced to do was I had to kind of wrestle with myself because I have a goal to pursue graduate studies to then go and teach at a high school or university level to share the wisdom of these great philosophers with others and walk with them that way. I had to have a serious conversation and say, is this something I want to do for the rest of my life? Which, if I was in class, I never would have had that conversation. It would have been a given. And my heart says yes. But my mind, because I was struggling with quote unquote COVID fatigue, was like, if I have to do this online for the next number of years, it's gonna suck. So thankfully, it doesn't look like I have to do that. But it did prompt me to have a unique experience. And so, how do I really quickly put that into a phenomenological lens? I had to look at the goal. I had to look at the aspiration. I had to look at how I was interpreting the goal, right? How I was viewing the goal. Because of my background, because I like objective things. You're either in or you're out. There's no in between. And so I took that approach with this conversation. And then I had to realize that, okay, what in my world has shifted that is making it harder to attain that goal I had. And that quite simply was just not being able to be in person and have those same conversations, which was definitely kind of hindering me a little bit. So I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if you know if that makes any sense. But is there anyone that wants to give what I just did a shot, or did I just enter something that is like, ugh?
I have a question because I have a need to understand what you said, Tagen.
Yeah.
Would you mind repeating just really concisely, not a long thing, just like in a couple sentences, summarize the first principle of phenomenology that you were describing?
So to the things themselves, yeah, absolutely. So to the things themselves simply means we try to approach the phenomenon, the text, the situation, for as it appears. And in sitting with it and contemplating it without the influence of outside sources,
Okay.
we strive to understand it
Right.
better.
So now I'm trying to link that to the COVID situation, and I'm seems to me that if that principle of phenomenology was one's goal, then that goal would be furthered by the COVID pandemic because one could sit at home and study the texts and not be in a classroom influenced by the professors and by other interpretations and by the classroom environment. So I'm not quite understanding why you're saying that your experience of the online courses rather than in-person courses, why that hindered you from a phenomenological perspective. Wouldn't that assist you in going straight to the text?
I think that's actually a fair question. But we know from Dasein is it reaches out for experience. And so when I was tackling a text I've never worked with before, it was more daunting because I kind of felt more alone in the journey than I would in a classroom, if that makes sense. But I think that's a good observation. Good observation, Mikey.
I think also Mikey's point kind of brings up and taking what you were saying too, questions more about, questions about what is philosophy and the fact of like is philosophy as an activity done with a text, or is it more of a dialectic done with other people?
Mm, yeah, that's a good point. And
Perhaps
it's
with and
yeah,
through a text, but involved with other
yeah,
persons and discussions and that kind of thing. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
but a
no,
really interesting
exactly.
point.
Yeah, no, it's good.
If I could just add one more thing, because I don't want to be
And I would
one-sided
say,
here.
Hale, like that's.
Oh,
Oh, I just want to say,
I'm
can I just
Yeah.
say
yeah,
something
go.
to Hale quickly?
Yeah.
I just want to say, Hale, that's something that I like. That's how I see philosophy, and that's how I like philosophy to be done personally. Like I retain things and I get really engaged in things when it's more of a dialectic rather than just wrestling with the text myself. That's my
Yeah.
preference.
Yeah, no. Go ahead, Mikey. Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah, I have trouble with the concept of originalism and the way that you described taking the first principle of phenomenology, going straight to the text without interpretation. It reminds me of like the constitutional originalists, say in the United States, where they claim that you can go to the words written on paper and you can simply literally follow those words. Uh, and the reason I have trouble with that is because, like, for example, Bertrand Russell made his lifelong project the pursuit of logic, formal logic, to be able to inventory the world and express ideas and express facts about the world using logical notation, because Russell believed that grammar was inherently ambiguous, that there was no way to accurately describe the world, much less one's thoughts about the world, using grammar. And so if Bertrand Russell was right, then it would seem impossible to go to texts, whether it be the Constitution or whether it be writings of philosophers. It would be impossible to correctly infer from words alone, from grammar alone, what the intent was.
I mean, that's obviously a bigger and slightly different topic, but I mean, my response to that is even even within even within the first principle of phenomenology, it recognizes, I think it recognizes that, you know, the revealing process begins, but it's not necessarily going to be fully completed. And in the topic of constitutional originalism, right? That's why even the originalist will turn to extra sources because they weren't there. So to get a sense of what was going through the founding fathers of the nation, right? They will go to the Federalist Papers, which were directly designed and put in newspapers to defend the thoughts in the Constitution. So, although it is good for an individual to wrestle with texts and to work with texts, right? There's always going to be the recognition that in cases clarity is going to need to be given. I'd be interested to get Hale's thoughts on kind of how the first principle works.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? I think Mikey brings up a really interesting point. And to that, I want to say that I think sometimes is a little bit misleading because of what it implies, or what I think the image that it conjures up for people is the things in themselves as objective entities, and that's
Right.
really not what it's about. It's about the things that they are as they are revealing themselves to the observer.
Mm.
So basically, phenomenology, sometimes I like to put the word descriptive in front of it, and I'm not the only person who does that, because it's really a description of perception is what some people describe it as. Now there is a flip side to that, which is that then it becomes extremely subjective. um, and so there is a lot of debate within the schools as to what degree does phenomenology at times collapse into a kind of subjectivism where it is about describing, how your world, life, and self appear as phenomena, and phenomena always appear to someone or some community in some certain way. And so it isn't really about finding, and there's questions about finding ones that are more original or not. But it does lend itself to problems of subjectivism for sure. Yeah, kind of the opposite of what your original concern was in a sense.
Yeah, well, Hale, I was thinking about some of the reconstructionists who talk about how it's impossible to view the world objectively because the observer affects the world. So, I mean, a clear example of that would be like an artist and a model. So the artist is painting the model, and it's very likely that the model is going to be reacting in some way to the artist, and the relationship between the artist and the model is very unique. And it's hard to look at the model as a atomic entity which is not affected by the world. And likewise, you know, some of the reconstructionists really attacked philosophy as a static study of the world, when the mere act of studying the world changes that world. And the scientific parallel to that would be quantum mechanics, where one, not the only, but one of the views of quantum phenomenon is that the act of observing causes a collapse. So the observer actually affects the behavior of particles, of quantum particles, and that's not everyone agrees with that, but that would be in theory a parallel in the natural world. So the fundamental question is there a such thing as an objective world which is not affected by the observer?
Yeah, and I think this I mean, we're getting into some other topics, but this then lends itself to, like, are there then a priori structures of observation which find themselves consistent in any kind of observation that might lend themselves to being some sort of objective foundation? But then, of course, like, are those a priori principles actually found within the observation, or are they just preconditions of any kind of observation? And we can see issues like with this too. You're talking about quantum mechanics, but too there's interest in terms of, and Nicole could speak to this as well, within the context of psychology, and even trying to do studies of human beings and all that kind of stuff, wherein, we want to know what people are like, so we seek to study them, but in the process of studying people change their standard habits. So then the problem becomes the picture that we perceive in the act of actually intentionally trying to perceive becomes not the picture that we were originally trying to seek and find. A wordy way of putting it, but it's a constant problem, and it's been a problem for a long time with philosophy as well. Right? This is certainly is not a new issue.
Yeah, no, for sure. Hey, I want to just see, Nicole, do you want to give this a go? Is there a situation that you can think that happened to you during COVID thus far, or whatever, that you want to try and phenomenologically observe?
Well, I think that I went through it previously in my last example, but I guess, and specifically relating to the three principles of phenomenology, I guess it's maybe my understanding and appreciation of art. And I know that sounds very out there, but hear me out on this one. So
Yeah.
I used to see art in a way that it needs to be representative art. So basically a picture copy of a photograph or a landscape or whatever. Like, and I'm talking specifically about painting in this sense. So I used to think good art was art that was an exact replication of reality. But and at the same time, I also thought to get to creating good art in painting style, I would have to copy the of a great painter or some painting professional or something, or I'd have to try to copy their works as much as possible to try to, because I couldn't produce something as good as that. And I'm going to relate this to the 3 principles of phenomenology, because when I revisited acrylic painting, I first tried to do more representational art, so to try to copy landscape pictures I've taken that really inspired me. And I later was like, okay, if I'm just copying a picture, am I really doing art? Or is there really a point to just copying a picture? Because a picture is kind of as good as it can get if I'm looking for mere perfectionism. So I started doing things a bit more abstractly. Instead of making fine details and making things look as perfectly as a copy as they are to the photograph, I made big globs of paint without mixing it properly and on the canvas with a bunch of texture and things that shouldn't go together but kind of do go together. And then I kind of made my own artwork that way. And the way I did that is I went to things themselves, and that act is an interpretive one, because I used my interpretation to create a way that I thought was a different way of approaching the artwork. And the way I see that artwork is in my own unique world. So that's how I would relate that to the 3 principles of phenomenology. And again, during the pandemic, I revisited acrylic painting and I went my own way with it. And I just looked at the phenomenon itself. So that's my
great.
contribution.
Thanks, Nicole. All right, I think that's just about all the time we have. This has been the Canadian Philosophy Show. I've been Tagen Marshall with Hale Rothery, Michael Robert Caditz, and Nicole Kirigin. And we will talk to you on your radio next week. Thanks again to CHLY and CJSF. Good night, everyone.